The following story is a work of fiction intended for entertainment purposes only. Names, characters, businesses, places, events, and incidents are either the products of the author's imagination or used in a fictitious manner. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental.
You know that scene in every disaster movie where the people on the beach are just staring at the tide, pulling back, completely unaware that a tsunami is about 10 seconds away from wiping them off the map? That was me. That was our whole agency. We were standing on the shore drinking $14 lattes, congratulating ourselves on how great the view was, while the wave was already cresting over our heads. I'm sitting in my office right now. Well, what used to be my office. The glass walls are still here, but the Herman Miller chair is gone. The awards are in a cardboard box, and security is waiting by the elevator to escort me out. But the thing is, I'm not leaving with my head down. I'm leaving with a smile. Because while I might be out of a job, the man who tried to destroy me is currently trying to explain to the SEC and a very angry board of directors why his entire life is a lie. It started about 6 months ago. I'm the VP of strategy at one of the top agencies on Madison Avenue. Or at least, we were the top agency. We were the guys you called when you wanted to rebrand a nation or launch a piece of tech that changed the world. And the captain of this ship was Jonathan. You have to understand who Jonathan was to me. He wasn't just a CEO, he was the guy who plucked me out of a chaotic mid-tier firm when I was 26 and polished me into a killer. He was charismatic, impeccably dressed, the kind of guy who could sell ice to a polar bear and make the bear thank him for the transaction. He was my mentor. I'd have taken a bullet for the guy. I remember this one dinner we had late last year. We had just landed the Omnitech account, which is basically the holy grail of tech contracts. We're talking a retainer worth tens of millions. We were celebrating at this steakhouse in Tribeca, just me and Jonathan. He poured me a glass of some obscene vintage red wine and looked me dead in the eye. He told me that I was the future of the agency. He said he saw himself in me, the hunger, the vision. He said he was getting tired of the grind and that in a few years, when he stepped up to chairman, he wanted me in the CEO chair. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? I'd given that company my blood, sweat, and weekends for 7 years. I thought I was part of the family. I didn't know that family was just a word Jonathan used to make you lower your guard before he cut your throat. The first sign that something was wrong wasn't obvious. It was subtle, like a glitch in the matrix. We were pitching a campaign for a luxury car brand. I had led the strategy myself. We had this concept called the silence between. It was beautiful, minimalist, completely different from the loud, aggressive ads our competitors were doing. We kept the files locked down, code names, password-protected servers, the works. Only the core team saw the creative. Presentation day comes. We walk into the client's boardroom, feeling like rock stars. Jonathan is there, smiling, patting me on the back. We set up the deck, but before we can even start, the client, this stiff guy named Marcus, clears his throat and looks uncomfortable. He asked us if we could wait a second because he wanted to show us something the previous agency had just presented an hour ago. I didn't think much of it. I figured it would be some loud, flashy trash that we would easily crush. Marcus pulls up a slide on the big screen. My stomach dropped through the floor. It was our concept. Not just similar, it was our concept. The silence between. The same tagline, the same color grading, the same distinct visual metaphor of a hawk flying over a silent canyon. The room went dead silent. I felt the blood drain out of my face. I looked at Jonathan. He looked shocked, his mouth hanging open slightly. He played the part perfectly. I tried to salvage it. I told Marcus that great minds think alike, that this was a coincidence, but I knew I sounded desperate. You don't have coincidences that specific. The client was polite, but I could see it in his eyes. He thought we were the ones who copied it. Or worse, he thought we were unoriginal hacks. We lost the pitch. Obviously. The ride back to the office was brutal. I was spiraling, trying to figure out how this happened. Was our server hacked? Did an intern leave a laptop at a bar? Jonathan sat next to me in the town car, looking somber. He put a hand on my shoulder and told me not to beat myself up. He said these things happen. He said maybe the idea wasn't as unique as we thought. That was the first red flag, though I didn't see it then. A unique idea doesn't get replicated down to the hex code of the color palette by accident. But Jonathan was so calm about it. He was already pivoting, talking about focusing on the Omnitech account, making sure we kept them happy. Omnitech. That was our lifeboat. As long as we had them, we were safe. The rep for Omnitech was a woman named Sienna. Sienna was intense. She was beautiful in a sharp, dangerous way, like a diamond that could cut glass. She was always dressed in monochrome, very severe, very high fashion. She treated the agency staff like we were the help, but she adored Jonathan. Whenever she came to the office, she'd breeze past the reception, ignore the juniors, and go straight to Jonathan's corner office. I didn't think anything of it. Client relations, right? You have to schmooze the people signing the checks. A month after the car pitch disaster, we were gearing up for a massive renewal with a beverage giant. This was my redemption. I triple-checked security. I made the team work on non-networked computers. I was paranoid. I wasn't going to let a leak happen again. 2 days before the pitch, Jonathan called me into his office. He looked tired. He poured himself a drink at 11 a.m. and didn't offer me one. He told me he was worried about me. He said I seemed stressed, frayed around the edges. He asked if I was sure I had a handle on the beverage campaign. He said, "I just don't want a repeat of last month, Alex. The board is watching. They're asking questions about your leadership." It stung. I told him the strategy was bulletproof. I told him I had locked it down tighter than Fort Knox. He just nodded, looking at me with this pitying expression that made my skin crawl. He said, "Okay, I trust you, but send me the final deck tonight. I want to review it personally over the weekend, just to be safe." I sent it to him. Encrypted, password protected, just to him. Monday morning, we lost the account. The competitor didn't just have our idea this time. They had our budget breakdown. They undercut us by exactly 5% on every single line item. It was surgical. It was an assassination. When the news hit the office, the morale didn't just drop. It evaporated. People were crying in the break room. Layoff rumors started circulating within the hour. I went to Jonathan's office, ready to scream, ready to demand an internal investigation. I was going to suggest we bring in forensic IT guys. I was convinced we had a mole. I barged in, and I froze. Sienna, the Omnitech rep, was there. She was sitting on the edge of Jonathan's desk, way too close to him. When I opened the door, she didn't jump. She just slowly slid off the desk, smoothed her skirt, and looked at me with this cold, bored amusement. Jonathan didn't look guilty. He looked annoyed. He asked me if I knew how to knock. I apologized, my heart hammering in my throat. I told him about the beverage account. I told him they had our numbers. Jonathan sighed, took off his glasses, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at Sienna, then back at me. And then he said the thing that finally woke me up. He said, "Alex, maybe the problem isn't a mole. Maybe the problem is that your work is just predictable. If everyone can guess your strategy, maybe it's time to rethink if you're the right person to lead strategy." It was a gut punch. He was gaslighting me. I knew our numbers weren't predictable. They were specific calculations based on proprietary data. You couldn't guess them, but I couldn't say that. Not with Sienna standing there, watching me like I was a bug she wanted to step on. I left his office feeling about 2 inches tall. But as I walked back to my desk, the shock started to wear off and something else took its place. Suspicion. I replayed the scene in my head. Sienna on the desk. The look they shared. The fact that Jonathan, the man who supposedly viewed me as a son, was suddenly questioning my competence instead of raging about a stolen contract. That night, I didn't go home. I stayed. I waited until the cleaners had come and gone. I waited until the lights of the city were the only things illuminating the bullpen. I knew Jonathan's habits. I knew he was sloppy with his personal tech because he was arrogant. He thought he was untouchable. He had an iPad that he used for creative review that he usually left in the top drawer of his desk. It was synced to his personal iCloud, not the company server, so he could bypass the IT firewalls for his private projects. I crept into his office. It felt like I was breaking into a bank. My hands were shaking. I tried the drawer. Locked, of course. I looked around. Jonathan was a creature of habit. He had a bookshelf filled with industry awards and vintage advertising annuals. I remembered something from years ago. We were drunk after a holiday party, and he lost his keys. He told me he always kept a spare set taped under the base of his Ad Man of the Year trophy because irony is the soul of wit. I lifted the trophy. There was a small piece of painter's tape, and underneath it, a small silver key. I unlocked the drawer. The iPad was there. I took a deep breath, sat in his chair, the chair he promised would be mine one day, and woke up the screen. I knew his passcode. It was the date he founded the agency. 04 Fim. It unlocked. I went straight to his email, but I didn't look at his work email. I went to a Gmail account I saw logged in. The username was something innocuous like J. Sterling, Consulting. I started scrolling, and then I stopped breathing. There were dozens of threads, but the ones that caught my eye were all from a sender named SV Sienna Vance. I opened the most recent one, dated 2 days ago, the night I sent him the beverage deck. The subject line was simply, dinner, but the body of the email wasn't about food. It read, my contact at competitor agency is asking for the budget breakdown. They're willing to go to $40K for this one. Make sure it's the Excel file, not the PDF. They need to edit the formulas. Also, transfer the usual 10% to the Cayman account. Daddy needs a new pair of shoes. And, underneath her message, there was a forwarded attachment. Final Bev Uden strategy encrypted.stx. My file, the one I had sent only to him. I felt like I was going to throw up. It wasn't a hack. It wasn't a sloppy intern. It was Jonathan, my mentor, the man who taught me everything I knew. He wasn't just sleeping with the client rep. They were running a chop shop. They were selling our agency's intellectual property to our competitors for cash kickbacks. But as I kept reading, I realized it was worse than just greed. Much worse. I found a draft email in his folder. It was addressed to the chairman of the board. The subject line was, concerns regarding Alex's performance and security breaches. He wasn't just selling the work. He was setting me up to take the fall for the leaks. He was going to frame me, fire me, and use the security scandal to tank the agency's stock price so he and Sienna could buy in bulk before restructuring. I sat there in the dark, the blue light of the iPad illuminating my face, and I realized 2 things. 1. My career was dead if I didn't do something. 2. I was going to burn this entire place to the ground, and I was going to make sure Jonathan was inside when I lit the match. You know that feeling when you walk down a staircase in the dark and you think there's one more step, but your foot just hits empty air? That absolute, heart-stopping moment of vertigo? That was my life for the next 48 hours. I was sitting in Jonathan's chair, the iPad glowing in the dark office, reading the evidence of my own execution. I wanted to smash the thing against the wall. I wanted to storm into his penthouse and scream at him. But I knew if I did that, I was dead. He'd spin it. He'd say I broke in, that I was unstable, that I fabricated the emails. He was the CEO. I was just the stressed-out VP who had lost 2 major accounts back to back. Who would the board believe? I had to be smart. I had to be cold. I took my phone out and started taking photos of the screen. I didn't dare forward the emails to myself. Logs would show that. I didn't want to trigger any alerts on his side, so I did it the old-fashioned way. I snapped pictures of every damning thread, every attachment, every bank transfer number to the Cayman accounts. My hands were shaking so bad some of the first ones were blurry, and I had to retake them. I spent 20 minutes photographing the anatomy of the betrayal. I saw how they did it. Jonathan would accidentally CC Sienna on internal strategy threads. Or he'd upload a deck to a shared Dropbox that was password protected, but the password was just the agency's zip code. It was lazy, but it worked because nobody suspects the king is robbing his own castle. I put the iPad back in the drawer. I locked it. I put the key back under the trophy and retaped it exactly how it was. I wiped the desk where I'd touched it with my sleeve. I walked out of the building at 2:00 a.m. and I didn't sleep a wink. I sat on my couch, staring at the photos on my phone, trying to process the magnitude of it. Jonathan wasn't just greedy, he was liquidating us. The agency stock had dropped 14% in the last quarter due to client churn. The lower it went, the cheaper it would be for him to buy back the controlling shares once the board panicked and sold. He was burning down the house to buy the lot for pennies, and he was using my career as the kindling. The next morning was the hardest acting performance of my life. I walked into the office at 8:00 a.m. sharp. I got my coffee. I said hello to the receptionist. I sat at my desk and pretended to work on a post-mortem analysis of the failed beverage pitch. Around 10:00 a.m., Jonathan's assistant pinged me. "He wants to see you. Bring a notepad." Bring a notepad. That's corporate code for you're getting a formal warning. I walked into his office. The sun was streaming in, making the place look golden and majestic. Jonathan was standing by the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. He looked like a titan of industry. He turned around, gave me a sad smile, and motioned for me to sit. He didn't yell. That would have been easier. Instead, he did this soft, concerned, disappointed dad routine that made me want to vomit. He told me that the board was out for blood. He said he had tried to defend me, but the losses were too significant. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a performance improvement plan, a PIP. For those of you who don't work in corporate, a PIP isn't a plan to help you improve. It's a paper trail legal uses to fire you without paying severance. It's a glorified eviction notice. I looked at the document. It cited lack of strategic oversight and careless handling of sensitive IP. The audacity was breathtaking. He was framing me for the exact crimes he was committing. I looked up at him. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from lunging across the desk. I asked him if he really thought I was the problem. I asked him if he genuinely believed I was careless. He sighed, took off his glasses and cleaned them. He said he didn't want to believe it, Alex. He said he loved me like family. But the facts were the facts. Data was leaking. Clients were leaving. And it was happening on my watch. He told me that maybe I was burned out. Maybe I was self-sabotaging. He actually suggested I see the company therapist. That was the moment the sadness died and the pure, cold hate took over. He wasn't just firing me. He was trying to make me doubt my own sanity. I signed the PIP. I had to play along. I told him I would do better. I told him I would tighten the ship. He smiled, relieved. He said he knew I had it in me. Then he dropped the other shoe. He told me there was one last chance to save my skin. A smaller pitch, but a prestigious one. A luxury watchmaker, Kronos. They were looking for a global agency of record. The pitch was in 10 days. He said, "Run this one, Alex, but keep it small. Just you and me. No team, no juniors. We lock this down. If we win this, I can go to the board and rip up this PIP. I can save you." I knew exactly what this was. This wasn't a lifeline. It was the final nail. He wanted me to work on it alone so that when it leaked, there would be absolutely no one else to blame. It would be the final proof that I was the mole. I thanked him. I shook his hand. His skin felt dry and papery. I went back to my desk and started planning my counteroffensive. I knew I had the photos of the emails, but photos of a screen aren't always enough in court, and the board might just try to bury it to avoid a scandal. I needed something undeniable. I needed to catch him in the act in real time, in a way that he couldn't spin. I started digging into Sienna. I needed to know why a rep for a tech company was laundering money for an ad exec. I spent the next 3 nights doing a forensic deep dive on the public records, It's amazing what you can find if you know where to look and you're fueled by pure rage. Sienna wasn't just an employee at Omnitech. I pulled her employment history. Before Omnitech, she worked at a boutique consulting firm in London. I looked up the firm. Dissolved 3 years ago. I looked up the partners of that firm. 2 names I didn't know, and one I did. Jonathan Sterling. They had known each other for a decade. He was a silent partner in her old firm. They weren't just lovers. They were long-term business partners. This was a grift they had probably run before. I checked the metadata on the photos I took of the emails. The Cayman account number she referenced, I couldn't access the bank, obviously, but I could search the routing number. It flagged on a whistleblower forum from 2023 regarding offshore shell companies used for consulting fees. I was building a map of their operation, but I still needed the smoking gun for this agency. 5 days before the Kronos pitch, the atmosphere in the office was toxic. People wouldn't make eye contact with me. I was a dead man walking, and everyone knew it. Jonathan kept checking in, asking to see my drafts for the watch campaign. I showed him dummy decks. I created a fake strategy, a decent one, but not the real one. I called it Time is a Construct. I put it on the server. I saw him log in and download it 10 minutes later. But here's where I started to lay my trap. I knew he was sending my work to the competitors, but I needed to prove that he was the sender, not me. I went to our IT guy, Marcus. Now, Marcus was a guy I had saved a few times. I got him a raise the year before when Jonathan wanted to fire him for coming in late. Marcus was loyal to me, not the suit. I met Marcus at a dive bar 3 blocks away. I bought him a beer and told him I needed a favor. I didn't tell him everything. Too dangerous. But I told him I suspected my account was being mirrored. Marcus looked at me over his beer foam and told me that was impossible unless someone had admin access. I just looked at him. He got quiet. He realized who I was talking about. He asked me what I needed. I told him I needed to embed a tracker in a PDF. Not a virus, just a pixel tracker. Something that would ping back a location and IP address the moment the file was opened. And I needed it to be invisible. Marcus grinned. He said he could do better than that. He could script a macro into the Excel budget file. If someone opened it outside of the agency's IP range, it wouldn't just ping the location. It would take a screenshot of the user's desktop and email it to a hidden server. It was illegal as hell. It was perfect. I went back to work and finished the fake budget for the Kronos pitch. It was a juicy document. I inflated the numbers to make it look like we were going to overcharge the client. Exactly the kind of intel a competitor would drool over because it would allow them to undercut us easily. I embedded Marcus's Trojan Horse script into the spreadsheet. Then I did the hardest thing yet. I walked into Jonathan's office, looked him in the eye, and told him I was finished. I told him this was my best work. I acted nervous. I acted desperate. I told him, "Please, Jonathan, keep this one safe. I can't lose this." He looked at me with that fake benevolence and said, "Don't worry, Alex. I've got you. I'll review it tonight at home. Nobody else will see it." I sent him the file. Then I went home, sat in front of my laptop, and waited for the ping. At 9:45 p.m., I got the first notification. The file was opened. IP address, Upper East Side, Jonathan's penthouse. He was reviewing it. I waited. The clock ticked. 10 p.m., 10:15 p.m. Then, at 10:32 p.m., the second notification came in. The file had been opened again. But the IP address wasn't the Upper East Side, and it wasn't the client. The IP address resolved to an office building in Midtown, the headquarters of Apex Refrain, our biggest rival. And then the screenshot arrived in my inbox. It was a picture of a desktop screen, but it wasn't just the spreadsheet. The user had Outlook open in the background. You could clearly see the email that had just delivered the file. The sender wasn't me. It was J. Sterling Consulting. And the recipient at Apex Refrain? It wasn't just some random exec. It was their chief growth officer. And the subject line read, "The final nail. Do it." I had him. I had the timestamp. I had the IP. I had the screenshot proving he sent it. But then I realized something terrifying. The pitch wasn't for another 3 days. If I went to the board now, Jonathan might still have time to maneuver. He might claim his email was hacked. He might destroy the servers. No, I couldn't just expose him. I had to let him finish the crime. I had to let him walk into that pitch thinking he had won. I had to let him sit next to me in front of the client, smug and secure. I was going to let him pull the trigger, and then I was going to show the world that the gun was in his hand. The 3 days leading up to the pitch were a masterclass in psychological torture. I had to sit across from Jonathan in our glass-walled conference room, going over the strategy that I knew he had already sold to our competitors. It was surreal. He would point to a slide, the fake slide I had created, and nod thoughtfully. He'd say things like the demographic analysis was sharp, or that the tone felt right for a heritage brand like Kronos. He was critiquing a mirage. He was giving notes on a trap. Every time he complimented the work, I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the laptop across the room and show him the screenshot of his own treason. But I kept my mouth shut. I nodded. I took notes. I played the part of the grateful, desperate protégé clinging to his last chance. But while I was playing the role of the dutiful soldier during the day, my nights were a different story. You see, I couldn't just expose Jonathan. Exposing him would destroy him, sure, but it wouldn't necessarily save the agency, and it wouldn't guarantee my reputation survived the blast radius. If I just dumped the emails and walked away, the narrative would be messy. I needed a complete victory. I needed to not only prove he was a thief, but also prove that I was the only one capable of winning the account. So every night from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m., I was working on a second pitch deck. The real pitch deck. I worked from my apartment, disconnected from the internet, on a personal laptop that had never touched the agency's Wi-Fi. I built a campaign that was raw, honest, and completely different from the decoy I gave Jonathan. The decoy was safe. It was standard corporate fluff. The real campaign was risky. It was about how time isn't money, but the only currency that actually matters. It was emotional. It was the kind of work that wins awards. I was running on caffeine and adrenaline. I felt like a spy in a Cold War movie switching briefcases. 2 days before the pitch, the paranoia ramped up. I was in the break room getting my 4th coffee when I overheard Sienna talking on her phone in the hallway. She didn't see me. She was speaking in that low, hushed tone people use when they're discussing things they shouldn't. She told the person on the other end that the assets were in place, and that the announcement was drafted for Friday afternoon. Friday afternoon. The pitch was Friday morning. My stomach turned over. They weren't just planning to fire me after the loss. They were planning a press release. I went back to my desk and did something risky. I logged into the agency's public relations server. I had admin access from an old project I managed years ago. I searched the drafts folder. And there it was. For immediate release, agency announces restructuring following internal investigation. I opened it. It was worse than I thought. Jonathan wasn't just firing me for incompetence. The release cited gross negligence and alluded to personal struggles with substance abuse as the reason for my departure. He was going to frame me as a drug addict. He knew I had a history of anxiety. He knew I took prescription meds for it years ago, something I told him in confidence over drinks one night when I thought we were friends. He was weaponizing my vulnerability to paint a picture of an unstable junkie who leaked client data during a blackout. It was brilliant. It was evil. If that release went out, I would never work in this industry again. I wouldn't be able to get a job managing a shift at a copy shop, let alone a strategy department. That was the moment I stopped feeling any guilt about what I was about to do. I had wondered, briefly, if I was going too far. After reading that draft, I realized I hadn't gone far enough. I needed an audience. The pitch meeting was scheduled to be just me, Jonathan, and the clients from Kronos. That wasn't enough. If I exposed him there, it would be his word against mine in a closed room. He could spin it. He could say I was having a breakdown. I needed the board. The chairman of the board was a guy named Elias. Elias was 70 years old money, tough as nails, and cared about one thing: the stock price. He liked Jonathan, but he liked money more. I couldn't just invite him. Jonathan would block it. I had to trick him into coming. On Thursday afternoon, 24 hours before the pitch, I used a burner phone to call Elias's executive assistant. I didn't identify myself. I put on a heavy accent and told her I was calling from the office of the CEO of Apex Refrain, our competitor. I told her, "Please inform Mr. Elias that we are looking forward to the acquisition talks, and we appreciate the agency throwing the Kronos pitch to lower the valuation. It's a smart move." Then I hung up. It was a gamble, a massive one. But I knew Elias. He was paranoid about hostile takeovers. If he thought Jonathan was selling the company out from under him to a competitor cheaply, he would want to see it happen with his own eyes. He wouldn't call Jonathan to ask. He would show up to catch him in the act. Friday morning arrived. I put on my best suit. I made sure my tie was perfect. I looked in the mirror and told myself that by 5 p.m., I would either be the CEO or I would be escorted out by security. There was no middle ground. I carried 2 flash drives in my pocket. One was the decoy, the one Jonathan had already sold to the competition. The other was the kill switch. I walked into the boardroom at 9:50 a.m. The Kronos team was already there. 4 of them. Swiss, serious, looking at their watches, literally. Jonathan walked in a minute later. He looked radiant. He clapped me on the shoulder, squeezed it a little too hard, and asked me if I was ready to bring it home. I looked him in the eye and told him I had never been more ready in my life. He sat at the head of the table. I sat to his right. He plugged in his laptop to the main screen. Then the door opened. Jonathan turned around, annoyed that someone was interrupting. His face dropped. It was Elias, the chairman. And he wasn't alone. He had 2 other board members with him. They looked grim. Jonathan stood up, stuttering. He asked Elias what he was doing there. Elias just walked to the back of the room, sat down, and folded his arms. He told Jonathan to proceed. He said he wanted to see the winning strategy, personally. Jonathan shot a look at me, a look of pure panic. He hadn't accounted for an audience, but he recovered quickly. He was a pro. He smiled, welcomed them, and turned to me. "Well," Jonathan said, gesturing to the screen, "Alex, why don't you lead us off?" He was handing me the rope to hang myself. He expected me to present the decoy deck, the one Apex Refrain had already prepared a counterpitch for. He expected me to fail in front of the board, cementing his narrative that I was incompetent. I stood up. I walked to the podium. I plugged in my laptop, disconnecting his. I looked at the Kronos executives. I looked at Elias, and finally, I looked at Jonathan. He gave me a subtle nod, urging me to start the show. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice steady. "Today was supposed to be a presentation about watches, about luxury, about time." I clicked the remote. The screen didn't show the opening slide of the decoy deck. It showed the screenshot, the massive, high-definition image of Jonathan's email to the Apex Refrain executive, the timestamp, the attached budget file, the subject line, the final nail. Do it. The room went so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. I saw Jonathan's eyes go wide. He froze. He didn't understand what he was looking at for a split second. "But before we talk about time," I continued, "we need to talk about theft." I clicked again. The next slide was the bank transfer to the Cayman Islands account, highlighting the routing number linked to Sienna's shell company. "Jonathan," I said, turning to him, "I believe this is yours." The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. He stood up, knocking his chair over. "What is this?" he shouted. "What the hell are you doing? Turn that off." He lunged for the laptop. I stepped back. "I wouldn't do that, Jonathan. Because I just hit reply all on an email to the entire board, the SEC, and every trade publication in New York. The files are already out. Elias stood up in the back of the room. His face was purple. "Sit down, Jonathan," Elias roared. Jonathan froze. He looked at Sienna, who was standing by the door. She was already reaching for the handle, trying to slip out. "And you," I said, pointing at her, "you might want to stay. The police are waiting in the lobby." That was a bluff, but she stopped. I turned back to the Kronos clients, who looked completely bewildered. "I apologize for the drama," I said calmly. "My former boss tried to sell your secrets to a competitor to tank our stock price. But the good news is, I didn't let him sell the real strategy." I pulled the second flash drive out of my pocket and held it up. "I have the actual pitch right here, and unlike the one he stole, this one is going to make you $1 billion. Do you want to see it, or should I call security first?" You know how they say time seems to slow down during a car crash? That's exactly what happened in that boardroom. For about 10 seconds, nobody moved. The only sound was the hum of the projector fan and the frantic buzzing of phones in pockets as the reply all email I'd just sent started hitting inboxes across the city. Jonathan stood there, his hand halfway extended toward the laptop, looking like a statue of a man realizing his life was over. The color hadn't just left his face. He looked gray. He looked old. Elias, the chairman, broke the silence. He didn't scream. He didn't throw anything. He just spoke in this terrifyingly low, gravelly voice. "Jonathan," he said, "is that your signature on the Cayman transfer?" Jonathan snapped out of his trance. The panic set in. He started sputtering, waving his hands around. "Elias, please, this is fabricated. Alex is sick. I told you he's having a breakdown. Look at him. He's hallucinating conspiracies." He turned to the Kronos clients, forcing a wild, desperate smile. "Gentlemen, I apologize. My employee is unwell. We'll call security and get this sorted out immediately." He reached for the conference phone on the table. I didn't try to stop him. I didn't have to. Elias stood up. He walked over to the phone, put his hand over Jonathan's, and slowly pressed the receiver back down. "We don't need security for him, Jonathan," Elias said. "We need them for you." Then the phones started ringing. Not the conference phone. The personal cell phones of the other 2 board members. Then Elias's phone. Then, faintly, I could hear a commotion outside the glass walls in the main office. People were checking their emails. The reply all had landed. The secret wasn't just in this room anymore. It was on every screen in the agency. Sienna, who had been frozen by the door, decided it was time to cut her losses. She turned the handle. "I think I should go," she said, her voice icy. "This is an internal matter." "Actually," I said, speaking up for the first time since the reveal, "it's a legal matter. And since you're the co-signatory on the shell company receiving stolen funds, I think the forensic accountants, who were CC'd on my email, by the way, will want to know where you're going." She stopped. She looked at Jonathan with pure venom. The business partner dynamic evaporated instantly. She wasn't his lover anymore. She was his co-defendant, and I could see her doing the math on how fast she could cut a deal to testify against him. The Kronos executives were whispering furiously in Swiss German. The head guy, a stern man named Herr Muller, stood up. He looked at the chaos, then he looked at me. "This is—" Muller searched for the word. "Unprofessional." My heart sank. I thought I'd lost them. I thought the drama was too much. "It is," I agreed, walking toward him. "It's a disaster. But here is the reality, Mr. Muller. You came here for an agency that would protect your brand. My former boss was selling you out before you even signed the contract. I just destroyed my own career to protect your intellectual property. If I'm willing to do that for a client I haven't even signed yet, imagine what I'll do for you once you're actually on the roster." I held out the second flash drive. The real pitch. "This drive contains the campaign that Apex Refrain doesn't have. It's clean, it's secure, and it's the best work I've ever done. Give me 10 minutes. If you don't like it, you can walk out, and I promise you'll never see me again." Mueller looked at Jonathan, who was now slumped in a chair, head in his hands. Then he looked at Elias. Elias gave a stiff nod, granting permission. Mueller sat back down. 10 minutes, he said. I plugged in the drive. I didn't look at Jonathan. I didn't look at Sienna. I pitched. I pitched like my life depended on it because it did. I ignored the fact that the CEO of my company was sobbing quietly in the corner. I ignored the fact that security guards, actual uniformed NYPD officers, not just the lobby guys, were gathering outside the glass doors. I delivered the "Time is a Construct" campaign. It was emotional. It was sharp. When I finished, the room was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of respect. Mueller stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at Elias. "We will sign," Mueller said. "On one condition." He pointed at me. "He runs the account, directly. No intermediaries." Elias nodded. "Done." And that was it. The heir left the room. The police came in a moment later. It turns out Elias hadn't called them. I hadn't either. The CFO of the agency had called them the second he saw the bank transfer screenshot in his inbox. Financial crimes don't mess around. Watching Jonathan get escorted out was anticlimactic. He didn't fight. He didn't scream. He just looked dazed. He looked at me as he passed, and for a second I thought he was going to curse me out. But he just shook his head and whispered, "I made you." "Yeah," I said, loud enough for the board to hear. "You did." Sienna was less dignified. She tried to claim diplomatic immunity, which she definitely didn't have, and then threatened to sue everyone in the room. They took her out in handcuffs, too. The next few hours were a blur of lawyers, crisis management teams, and interviews. The agency went into lockdown. The stock halted trading. I sat in that boardroom alone for a long time after everyone left, just staring at the empty chairs. That was 6 months ago. The fallout was nuclear. Apex Refrain, the competitor, got hit with corporate espionage charges. Their CEO stepped down. It was a bloodbath on Madison Avenue. As for Jonathan, he's currently out on bail, awaiting trial for fraud, embezzlement, and corporate theft. The addiction narrative he tried to pin on me backfired spectacularly when the press found out he was the one funneling money to fuel a gambling habit that had spiraled out of control. Sienna turned state's witness within 48 hours. She gave them everything: the emails, the offshore accounts, the names of other executives they had compromised. She'll probably get a reduced sentence, but her career is ash. And me? I'm sitting in the corner office now. The view is incredible. Elias named me interim CEO 3 days after the pitch. Last week they removed the interim from the title. I didn't get the job because they loved me. I got the job because I was the only person the clients trusted. I was the guy who blew the whistle. But it's not exactly a fairy tale ending. The work is harder. Now. The trust in the agency is shattered, and I have to rebuild it brick by brick. Half the staff left. The ones who stayed look at me differently. They respect me, sure, but they're also afraid of me. They know I'm the guy who decapitated the king to take the throne. I keep Jonathan's Ad Man of the Year trophy on my shelf. I kept the key taped underneath it, too. Not because I use it, but as a reminder. In this city, the higher you climb, the thinner the air gets. And the people smiling at you, pouring your wine, calling you family? They're just waiting for you to blink. Jonathan taught me how to be a great ad man. He taught me how to sell a vision. He taught me how to win. But the most important lesson he taught me wasn't about advertising at all. He taught me that if you're going to stab someone in the back, you better make sure they're dead. Because if they survive, they might just hit reply all.
Thanks for watching and listening to Manhattan Exposes. What story would you like to hear next? Drop it in the comments below, and kindly leave a like and subscribe to hear more stories like this. Until next time.